Sci-Fi Wind Down Wednesday, and I'm Isis Asari, working hard. Let me start from the top. Hi, I'm Isis Asari. This is Sistah Scifi Wind Down Wednesday, where we work hard to make Wednesday your new favorite day of the week. Yay! So if you're on our email list and follow us on social media, you know that today's Wind Down Wednesday guest is T.L. Huchu, who is the author of USA Today bestselling Library of the Dead. It is part of a 5-book series. So book 2 is Our Lady of Mysterious Elements, followed by The Mystery of Dunvegan Castle. I'm currently sold out of book 4, which is kind of embarrassing. And book 5 is The Secret of the First School, which is, which is the final book. It's book 5 of the series of the Edinburgh Nights series. And this is where Ropa's story ends, at least in terms of the book, at least in terms of right now. So if you've read the book and if you've watched our past discussions with TL Tendai, you know that this will be a great conversation. I have the live up on my computer so I can see your chat and your questions on my screen. So if you have questions during the conversation, hey, Sifa, I wonder who that is. That's probably Kate. You can drop your questions in the chat. Okay. So let me invite Tendai now, also known as TL Huchu. And while we wait for TL Huchu to join, please let me know how your Wednesday has been in the chat. My Wednesday has been busy. As you know, I wear a couple of different hats out here in the literary space. One of them is that I get to work with the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association. This weekend I was in Chicago scoping out Crown Plaza O'Hare, which will be the location for this year's Nebula Conference and Award Ceremony. For those of you who decide to attend in person or virtually, you're in for a treat. We have a lot of great programming. And all the updates will come out either via email or social media. So more to come on that. Please let me know how your week has been in the chat. While we wait for TL to join. I will share this in a couple of places. And please let me know how your week or your Wednesday has been in the chat. Next week, we will be discussing We will be discussing the People's Library with Veronica G. Henry. Get your Sistah Scifi Wind Down Wednesdays while they're happening. I see.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello. I can hear you.
Yeah, let me.
Okay.
Apologies, I just got so muddled because we're on different time zones.
Yeah, and I was like, when I said that, I was like, did we have a conversation about time zones? I was like, it must be like 3 o'clock in the morning and so I was like, and life has been all over the place. So does this time still work for you? That's question number 1.
Look at me, I'm lively. I'm deep into working on a new novel, sort of like working on a second draft. So it's kept me busy. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm happy to see you. You look great. Yeah, and so I'm excited about our conversation. I can't believe this is the last book in the series. So
yeah. I enjoyed the Sistah Scifi event. I think that was 2022.
Yeah. I'm very bad with time, but that we'll go with that. That sounds right.
So it's
um,
great to be back.
and it's good to have you back. And the one thing, I mean, I know if there were discussions on it on person. Like the last book came out straight to paperback, which makes me sad because like I have several of the other books in hardcover, and then it's paperback. So I know, I'm sure there's a reason for that, but if your publishers and if we're like, oh, should we do something special for Edinburgh Nights? Putting that out in hardcover so people can collect all 5 in hardcover would be fun. That's just a random aside.
I'll be sure to pass that on. Leo Nichols did the covers there of the US version. They've got that gothic quality. I was just blown over by the level of creativity that went into them.
They're absolutely beautiful, and I was like, oh, the other regions get all hard. Anyway, that's me. Okay. So I'm glad you're up. You look great. Thank you for joining us. So we talked about did you, and we probably talked about this when we talked earlier, but did you know from the beginning that the Edinburgh Nights series would be a 5-book series, or did it happen organically through conversations with your publisher and with your agent?
I had planned it out as a anthology, so I knew where we would begin, where we were going, and I knew some of the larger details. But one of the things that happens when your characters start doing their own things, you have to tweak and change. But I largely knew what the overall arc was. But because of the way fantasy publishing works these days, particularly with series, I think readers get annoyed by the amount of abandoned new series that they like. So I started out with a 2-book deal. So I then had to make sure that the first 2 books were standalone, that they would work as standalone. So you then have like individual arcs working out. I still kept the overall thread in there. Then I got another 2-book deal,
Oh,
and that's thanks to the readers, because you live and die by the readers' reception of the work. So that way, I knew I could do book 3 and 4. So you'll notice that book 4 has a cliffhanger ending, a very strange ending, which is something that I riffed off Mortal Kombat Conquest. If anyone watched that wonderful series from the 90s, which was pretty grim. In fact, in Mortal Kombat Conquest, it was shocking because Shao Kahn, the bad guy, wins, right? And so I set it up as an ending of sorts because I still didn't know whether we would do book 5. So thankfully, when we got the green light, we could finish the story. So it's one of those things where you have a creative idea, but you're also working to the constraints of the industry, because obviously publishing is a commercial thing.
right. That's so fascinating. Okay, and I loved hearing how like you grew, like the audience grew, and how you manage the arcs within the books, within the series. So I love that as well. So then my next question is, it's not a spoiler because it's also in um, the book synopsis that you see on the publisher's site. So, as many of you already know, Ropa starts this series dead. Like she's vanished to the other place. And Roper herself expresses her own surprise. She's like, and I love the way she does it. She's like, I thought I was giving main character energy. How did you decide to make this the beginning of the quote unquote end, the last book of the series?
So, as we spoke about earlier, about sort of like the publishing journey of the book, and I don't bristle at this at all, because anytime you get any kind of constraint within the creative process, it just means you have to find a solution, and that's where the magic happens, right there. But it had been seeded throughout the narrative that there was something unusual about Roper. She's 15, she comes across as a little bit more mature than that, the origins of her father and stuff like that. So in this book, and I hope this isn't too big a spoiler, we realize that this isn't the first time Ropa has died and come back, or has been brought back by people that love her. So that was already embedded. In fact, one of the fun things about working on this final installment was all these threads that I had thrown up, I could now bring everything together into what is hopefully a satisfying conclusion, because I don't like soap operas because they just go on and on and on. I wanted something finite with a definitive endpoint, so that the reader isn't cheated of the initial idea that I set out to write.
And yeah, that makes complete and total sense to me. I'm sorry, I'm also switching things off the back end. And I do love how in book 5, so much is coming together that we've seen weave throughout the series. And that kind of ties into my next question. So for readers who've gone through the journey with Ropa, for readers who've grown up with Ropa, and they've watched her hustle for money, protect her sister, go up against like these whole academic institutions, how do you want them to feel when they close this last book?
How do I want them to feel? Well, I suppose I'll start by how I feel, which is I've had this character for near enough a decade, maybe even slightly longer, because the first short story which I conceived of, the Proto-Ropa, was published in 2014. And I've really inhabited this world, and it's all I've thought about for a decade in my life. So she feels like a good friend, a bit naughty and feisty, maybe not the kind of person that you want to go on adventures with because I'm a wimp. So I kind of miss her, but I hope readers, and readers are like the co-creators of the story. One of the things that I've enjoyed last year was someone sending me their fan fiction of a Ropa and Priya romance. They're friends in my series, but they completely envisioned it as something new. So I hope the series continues in the minds of the readers. That would be dope.
Yeah, and I love the idea of like you encouraging the story to continue in the minds of the readers. Leslie Cradle writes, got their signed copies, love the series. They're going to watch the conversation later, not to be exposed to any spoilers, which I love, but also like I love the way you craft like the connection between Priya and Ropa. And I was like, will this become a friends to lovers? Obviously in the age of romanticy, that's why, but I love that their connection remains deep and remains strong. And even in Ropa's dialogue, we can see how much Priya and their connection means to Ropa. And I thought that was really beautiful. So I have no doubt that Ropa and Priya and Ropa's sister and Ropa's Graham will continue to live in readers' mind. I know they'll continue to live in mine. I'm trying to decide on the next question, because I'm going to switch them because we're talking about Ropa's family. One character that was particularly interesting is that, we meet or we spend more time with Ropa's family, with Ropa's father in particular in this book. And despite the huge sacrifice he makes early in this book, for me, you made it impossible for readers to love him. Was that your intention? Was that just me? Because I'm like,
Well, I suppose it would be an interesting counterpoint to someone like Priya, if I can just address the first part, which is, we are fantastic, but there's other kinds of love. There is a certain intimacy to friendship that you don't necessarily get from a romantic connection, and I wanted to highlight that. They'll do anything for each other, and there's a certain tenderness there that I wanted to portray. You don't see that much of it in fiction because obviously romance has that pop that grabs the reader straight away. In constructing Ropa Moyo, this is the good thing about doing a series. I had a long period of time to think about his entrance and the kind of person he would be. But I decided that he was essentially an establishment figure. That he was cold, he was calculating, he was ruthless, and he didn't care about the consequences of his actions to other people. So in a way, I wanted to avoid that trope that you get with certain orphans in literature in which the parents were good and bad things happened to them. And I think this mirrors life. We all would like to think that our parents are good, kind, caring, innocent folk. But that's because we don't know them. We only get a small snapshot of their lives. And if we knew the reality, we would see they're just as flawed and as human as some of the people that we dislike. So I wanted Makomborero to sort of embody this as a reality, because that's something that we don't see too much in fiction. Okay, sometimes you get the trope in cartoons, a villainous dad and a kid who's trying to do the right thing. So maybe I was playing to that kind of energy.
And when we first met, I was like, the story sounds a bit too good to be true, but I was going to try to believe until I literally couldn't. I was like, I was definitely like, I'm sure Ropa's dad isn't. Anyway, so yes, and I appreciated the journey that I went on as a reader in Ropa's dealing with how our parents moved in the world and dealing with their humanity. My next question is, the Cult of Dundas seeks ascension through godhood through institutional power. And we see them doing that with the different schools of magic. For you, was this a commentary on how systems, educational, political, historical shape who gets access to power?
That's a big part of it. In the societies we live as they're currently constructed, we like to tell ourselves that these are meritocracies, but they're anything but that. I think these biases are embedded in how the systems that we are subject to operate. And this is kind of insidious, because when you have this slightly tick box mechanism, you can say, okay, we'll exclude this kid Ropa from being a real magician because she doesn't have the qualifications. How can you argue with that? But there's this deliberate gatekeeping that you find in institutions, and having done a stint in academia myself, I've seen this play out so many times, and it's so subtle and it's so beautifully done, particularly here in Britain where I live, that you really have no recourse against it. You can see it, but it's very, very hard to define. So I also wanted to kind of think about how we marginalize other perspectives and other forms of knowing or knowledge, and to have them and to have these two perspectives clash. But what I didn't want was your standard, and I think this is a very American trope. You have the outsider, guess who's coming to dinner, and then they prove to you that I'm as smart and as civilized as you are, and then we embrace them and we welcome them into that very same corrupt institution. So Ropa was always going to face hurdles. There was no point they were ever going to let her in. And the question is, what else exists outside of the institution? Dundas himself is a fascinating historical figure. And I learned a lot reading biographies from men like, is it Henry Melville who clearly adored him as a subject, because he's you are, and this is one of the things with dealing with the historical figures. We have our own perceptions now, but they were seen very differently back then. So I wanted to kind of look at these tensions, and because I live in Edinburgh, and when I first came to this society, you see these neoclassical buildings and all these really famous world-beating institutions. But what you don't see, or what they don't show you, is the corruption, the rot that's within them. That's kind of systemic. It makes these institutions what they are. It is what gives them their power. A friend of mine sent me something of Blue Sky, where someone was saying, after reading the series, that they had concluded that there were certain parts that were right and mirrored Scottish society, and would have to rethink how everything works, especially given that the world we're living in is undergoing a certain kind of transition.
Mm-hmm. 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 There's a whole thesis in like the world that you've created in Edinburgh Nights being a commentary on like the institutions that like, especially educational institutions that decide who has access to power, how marginalized communities enter those, the embedded corruption in those institutions, and other ways of being. And I think particularly like now it's interesting because like I'm looking at the themes of world building versus world breaking, and like what does that mean to step away from like the norms of like academic institutions are meritocracies, and like it is fair to say like access to, so yeah, so everything you say is very ticks a lot of boxes. As somebody who has experience in academia and is now navigating publishing, how do you navigate that in the real world, right? Like how do you navigate that for yourself? And now I'm going away from the book. I apologize.
That's a tricky one. I'm a bit of a skeptic and a cynic, and I accept the world as it is. And this is perhaps why you find in the fiction I published, you don't tend to have that happy, neat resolution that readers tend to enjoy, because it seems to be in the grand arc of human history. As soon as you try to fix the problem, you create yet another set of problems that you didn't anticipate, and it rolls on and on, even with the best intentions. And this is because of the fundamental flaw of human nature. I was listening to a comedian, Jimmy Carr, British comedian, and I believe comedians are sort of our modern day philosophers. They say the most profound things, and he was talking about capitalism, which is, in his opinion, the worst system bar the rest that have been tried. And this is because it factors in just how flawed, greedy human beings are. So for me, navigating these things, getting into publishing, creating a career for myself, I faced a lot of hurdles. But I just took them as an inherent part of what it is to get the thing that you want. I would not enjoy what I do if it had been given to me easily.
Right.
It's and now I'm not just talking of my own work. If you see sort of like this no resurgence, but how African SFF has blown up. And that's because a lot of people have done work to make that happen. N.K. Jemisin, Nedi Okorofa, Lauren Bukis, Ivo Hartman, editor of the first Afro SFF. Nothing will ever be handed to you. So when you negotiate with power, you have to come with that understanding that you have to do the work. And for me as a writer, that means creating the best stories that I can until you get to a stage where you're like, you know what? And again, this is the cold commercial reality. My publisher to say, okay, I can invest my capital into this product, and that is what it is to them. It's a product, and I understand that, and make a return on it. That's how I navigate it.
That makes sense. For those of you who just joined, we're TL Huchu is on Sistah Sci-Fi Wine on Wednesday. We are discussing the final book in the Edinburgh Nights series, The Secrets of the First School. If you enjoy this conversation or just a nerdish person, a bookish person in general, you can click this white arrow and you can follow TL and Sistah Sci-Fi if you don't already. I would love for you to read an excerpt. If you hear your book. Okay, because usually I give people a heads up because they're like, oh, I'd love to read an excerpt. And my book is not within arm's reach. One of my favorite parts of the book, if you don't feel like it's too much of a spoiler, is when Ropa learns what the first school is. But if you're like, that is too much
which
of a spoiler.
page is that on?
Let me.
You're gonna have to help me out here.
Find the page. Hold on.
Yeah, it's the thing. I don't actually think I've done any reading from
That section.
First school yet.
Yeah. So you can read whatever you feel most excited to read, because it's gonna take me a while to find that in my copy of the book. So
okay. Yeah. Let me try to think. That there is the scene in which Ropa goes to the land of the tall grass. This is the Shona culture version of heaven where the ancestors go to, and I'll just read a brief excerpt from it so that you can get a sense of what this world is like. The grass in the plain below ripples like under a gentle breeze. It's like a golden wave. The land of the tall grass is where you go to meet your ancestors. There's supposed to be loads of chilling and drinking mupeta. I have a decision to make. Should I go back out into a dangerous world, roped into a fight I can't possibly win, or stay here? My soul's taken a different form. I can't picture myself as a girl whose body my father stole. So I'm something else, the vague outline of a teenage girl. The only thing that reminds me of who I was is the outline of a handprint on my chest. It stings my soul just as much as it did my body. The women near the huts continue pounding their millet. They are singing now. Tinoshandira nimbe ya mambo, agotipa nzimbe, zadza imatura mudye mutakura, tichatambira pachanaya mvura. It's a simple verse which they repeat in unison, though one of them is a bit slower than the others. Their pestles work in time as the percussion accompanying their fine voices. Maybe there is room for a fifth in their band. Thank you, and I'll leave it at that. So that's about it. It's kind of like heaven envisaged as rural Zimbabwe, which is where I used to go for holidays as a school kid, and it was completely different from the small town that I grew up in. You'd get to stay in a mud hut. You'd had the cattle, had the goats. It was a big adventure.
No, and I love that the land of the tall grass is heaven. Like, I think a lot of times both my parents are from Ghana, West Africa, so like there's usually some condescension when talking about going to the village or going to, the countryside. So you've written the land of the tall grass with such beauty and grace and ease, and I definitely enjoyed that when reading Secrets of the First School.
I can totally understand that because leaving the town where, you grow up, you've got TV, you're watching He-Man and all that, and going to a slower rhythm of life that is measured by the seasons changing. But once you get there and you hear the stories your grandmother tells, like Shona folk tales are called Ngano, and it's usually about the rabbit and the baboon. The rabbit is clever, the baboon is his stupid uncle, and the rabbit is the trickster. And it's fascinating once you settle in. The thing that I'm working on now is a historical epic fantasy that is based on the DNA of the Iliad. So I've taken the Helen of Troy myth and reimagined it within the Shona cultural setting. And this is, if you think of your archetypal myth, it's the same as the Mahabharata, which is the Indian epic. And so it's such a universal kind of core for storytelling. If we're not going to get into Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces. Most myths have these kind of archetypes, and because I'm doing that historical work and the historical research, it got me to think about myself in position to my rural family. I kind of realized that there is a deep culture there that you don't necessarily access when you live in the town. And so when you get there, linguistically, they are more sophisticated than you. I speak very, very good Shona, but these are people that speak it more because you go through the brainwash sort of like education. I mean, we used to get caned if we spoke in Shona because there was this emphasis that you have to gear yourself for the English speaking world. And by the time you do 13 years of formal education, you think in English, you reason in English, and you lose some of that. And this is a deliberate thing. And my parents paid top dollar for this experience.
Right.
But I then realized that sort of like the folks in the rural areas, they kind of look at you a bit like an idiot because you lack that linguistic sophistication. You lack the knowledge of the deep culture that's there. And I've had to do a lot of research because I'm sort of setting this fantasy in a recreation of medieval Great Zimbabwe Empire, which is, I'm sure you've heard of the Great Zimbabwe ruins, built by the Karanga people, and I'm merging that with a bit of the Mutapa Empire and the Roji Empire, and kind of creating the sovereign state, which was a global superpower in its day, which had trade with India, China, the Swahili coast into Persia, as the artifacts discovered their shore. And so in doing this work, in fact, it's just the process of aging that I realized how much value was in these things. And this is the same journey Ropa goes into through the Edinburgh Nights. She initially dismisses her grandmother's folkloric magic, but it's the same magic that bails her out of tough situations time and time again because she wants to be part of this shiny thing. And I've undergone the same arc.
And I love the way we get, like, since Ropa is narrating, like, we get her voice in so much honesty because she says that. She's like, yeah, I totally discounted, the teachings of my grandmother. She wanted to teach me by the kitchen, but I wanted to go to this fancy school. And what validated her grandmother's teaching is like, oh, but she used to work at the Royal Bank of Scotland and used to make all this money, so it must really be good information, right? As opposed to like its effectiveness or the intention or like the way it shows up in like Ropa's life or like how she moves. So yeah, I think that's really insightful. The way I have a question on what you work on next, so I won't like I'll save the follow-up questions for your next project for that question. And I also want to bring in this comment. Bujili. I know I butchered that, so I apologize. Preach. I grew up in a Shona speaking area, and in the rural areas they speak Ndebele.
Debele. Buchilani. It's nice to see you, Buchilani. We went to school together. It's a fantastic rugby player. Um, yeah, there is that dynamic within Zimbabwe. So you've got most of the population, about 80% of it is Shona, and about 19% is Ndebele. So you've got these two big cultures coexisting. What I would say in that particular situation, growing up in a Shona area, because one of the things that I've realized, I have Shona friends that grew up in Bulawayo that are culturally Ndebele, and you get the converse, which is Ndebele people that grew up, say, in Harare that are culturally Shona. And some people within Zimbabwe take this as a contradiction, but that's again because if you don't know your history, you don't understand the amount of mixing that went through. And this is something that I have done in the research that I've done for the next novel. The Ndebele state itself consists of people led by Muzilikazi across the Limpopo River after he defied King Shaka of the Zulu Empire. So they were part of the Zulu Empire, and he struck out on his own. And in arriving, they absorbed the remnants of the Roji Empire that were there. This were the Kalanga and some Shona groups, and made them part of it. And they actually took what's called the Njelele Shrine, which is the Shona religion. They just came through and said, okay, this is the religion. Well, it's part of our state now. So there's that constant intercourse and flow that happens between the groups. Politicians might want to spread divisions because this is how you gain power. But when you have a deep understanding of history, you actually realize that our groups, we're Bantu people all the same. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So I'm so torn about this next question. So with any question, you could be like, I'm not going to answer that. But I absolutely loved the last sentence of the series. Right. I want to share it, if that's okay. And if you're like, no, that's too much of a giveaway, then I won't. But
Well, the book's been out for a few months. I
okay.
hope it doesn't kill it for anyone, but
Yeah.
go for it.
So, yeah. So just to let you know, I'm about to, and so, okay. And then, so in a sense, Ropa's offered everything that we thought she wanted in the beginning of the book. And Ropa's response is, ain't no magician, man. I'm a fucking witch. And to me, it was such a bold statement of self-determination, and acceptance. There are many ways to end the series. There are many ways to kind of like close Ropa's story in the published books, right? It can continue on in fan fiction and continue on in our heads. How did you choose this as the ending for Ropa, particularly this line for Ropa?
So we've spoken about Ropa wanting desperately to be part of these elite institutions, and I think it's that very human thing. I grew up Catholic, but when you know the history of the Catholic Church, you might want to question your devotion to it, and this isn't unique to the Catholic. It's any state. I'm from Zimbabwe. We have a very patriotic history that wipes away some of the horrors that we have committed over history to become who we are. And this is the same in Britain where I live, right? So the state will emphasize Britain's role in the abolition of the slave trade. How wonderful and enlightened they were, right? Um, And I understand this because if you want to attract people to your thing, then you kind of have to use propaganda. And the longer Roper deals with Scottish magic and understands the institutions and the fact that to have this foundation of magic, they had to wipe away the witches in Scotland. I mean, Scotland was brutal for accusing women and brutally murdering women because they were witches. But you also have to understand that if, in the development of certain modern professions, how do we get men becoming the people that bring children into the world, right? You go see, usually, or at least historically, not so much now, but you'd get a guy delivering babies, right? There were women that performed that role and did it well. In fact, there's research that was done that infant mortality went up once you had the male doctors taking over from these traditional midwives, and they did a lot of damage over time. But that's because when you get rid of a certain group of people that provides a particular service, take the power. It's all about everything in certainly in the world of the Edinburgh Nights. Everything comes back to the question of capital.
Mm-hmm.
So Ropa comes to this realization, but she, in her journey, because of her grandmother, who was also is revealed, taken in and worked for these institutions and partook in the disaster. So there aren't any simple binaries in which you've got good guys that are not complicit in the things that happen. And I think this mirrors the way our societies are. If you look at any gruesome human history, there's always people playing both sides and things like that. But when she meets these wonderful group of women that have solidarity, a community, and they have survived these things, she realizes that I don't necessarily need to be a part of this. There is an alternative path that I can take in which, and that's what she does. So again, part of it was because I really bristle at these depictions in which the outsider who faces a lot of prejudice, the reward for them is to become part of this bullshit institution that they're desperately trying to get into. And in the world that we live in today, with the internet and all the tools we have, you are an independent bookstore. That can exist alongside the big internet corporation whose name we must not mention. Yeah.
And that's okay. Yeah. And I love that was Roper's choice. I love that. I mean, that felt like a gift that you gave. That felt like a gift that I can't speak to our readers. It felt like a gift that you gave me. I don't have like a practice or a covenant or like that, but I like to identify as a Black witch. I was like, oh, Roper chose my side. She's on our team. So I felt, and it was nice to know like there was an alternative beyond these like elite institutions that were like so hierarchical and so stifling and such an outshoot of like imperialism, which you say in part of the book. It's like the king has come. He's like, I'm gonna go back to England and we're gonna do what the English do best. And somebody's like, what is that? It's like conquer, right? Before I was like colonize, like all the things, So to see Ropa intentionally choose something different, even though like it's not as clear, right? It aligns with like the type of person that I saw Ropa grow up to be throughout the series. So thank you for that gift. Okay. So then two more questions left, and then this or that. And this next question can be as big or as small as you want. And then the last question is, love to learn more about what you're working on next, like title, pub date, is there a publisher, all that good stuff, how we can support, and then I'll bring in the comments. So your friend says, super, I'm also excited about your next project. And Julia says, as a diaspora kid, I definitely feel that when you say that our parents paid top dollar for us to think in a different language, but realize that the ancestral knowledge, yes, that is true. I don't speak the language of my parents, and when I go home to Ghana, like they love to call me a lost child, which is probably true. Okay, so Tia, what are you reading, watching, or listening to right now?
Um, on the subject of languages, it's curious how we all remember the Obama years, and if you read Dreams from My Father, that's pretty much his story, trying to find out this part of his identity. It's I know there've been issues with Gino Diaz, but he still gave this fantastic quote over a decade ago, and in which he said that white supremacy is, and I'm badly paraphrasing that, is so complete that even if you remove the perpetrators, we would still continue it ourselves.
Mm.
Some time ago, Zimbabwe actually had a white minister of education, a white Zimbabwean, who suggested, like, look, what we are doing is crazy. We need to make sure our kids get a grounding in their indigenous languages, and then they have the English on top of that. Near unanimous rejection of it by black Zimbabweans. Are like, you're crazy, English is the international language, this is what we want our kids to learn. And quickly he backed down from that idea. It was like, well, it was a no-no. What am I reading and watching? I've been into Fallout. There's this video game based series. This was the second season, and it is just so well done. It's this weird post-apocalyptic words. It's nearly 2 a.m. I can't pronounce anything right. And
No, you're fine.
it's got ghouls. It's got death claws. It's ultra violent, but really smart. Great series with really fascinating characters. So I've been well into that. Reading wise, well, I've been so throughout when I was writing, I have been rereading the Iliad just to get that epic intonation fusing in my work. But I've also been reading The History of the Mutasa Kingdom by David Ajamvere. And this is one of the interesting things that's happening in Zimbabwe now, in which there's an older generation that is realizing, okay, in the age that we live in, there's a value of actually writing down our culture and things. So the Mutasa Kingdom is ruled by Chief Mutasa now, because when we got colonized, the old mambos and kings got downgraded into chiefs because we now had a queen, Victoria. So it's just a fascinating history and it's a local history, because a lot of our history is interested in the colonial period or in the post-colonial ZANU-PF government, and it misses out what we're interested in, which is like the granular local history of specific peoples and how they came to be. And it's just the history of the Mutasa Kingdom. It's a fantastic read. And you said, what have I been listening to? I listen to a lot of Zim dancehall. There's this artist called Soldier Love. It's this Zimbabwean version of Jamaican dancehall that has evolved, and it has its own sound. But there's this dude who sadly passed away in 2021, who is to the genre what Tupac was to hip hop, in that he's a wordsmith. He pretty much he creates sort of like a new tonal register for what you can do in Zimbabwean music. His songs are self-referential, heavily autobiographical, and it's in that sort of like dancehall chant, but it embodies our culture, our beliefs. For example, he'll be in one of his songs, which is Mbia. Mbia is like a little traditional plate, um, sort of like a traditional calabash that you can cover with a plate. And the whole concept behind that song is someone has bewitched him. And he genuinely believes that. And he's like, well, you're going to undo that anyway because I'm still going to rise up. So you've still got that braggadociousness that you get in dancehall or hip hop, but within a Shona cultural context, which is fascinating. I mean, lyrically, what he did with the Shona language, he's an artist who introduced new terms to the Shona language, like we now call each other Chibaba. That was him, which is like father. So when you meet another Zimbabwean guy and he says Chibaba, that's soldier love. Makuruwane, the cool one, that's entered the language because of him. Mahagam Gagam, which is kind of meaningless, but occasionally people use it. So to have someone who's so influential that he makes a mark on the language it's a very rare thing for an artist to achieve. And I just love this music.
Okay, so I'm reading the comments, but I will add him to my playlist on all the channels, so I'm excited about that. I dropped the Wikipedia page for Soldier Boy and Fallout in the chat.
Soldier Love.
Sorry. Soldier Boy, somebody else. Sorry. Soldier Love. Thank you for that correction.
Crank it.
Yeah, in the chat, Soldier Love and Soldier spelled Soldier. And Tendai, I will get the title of the book you're reading. I was spelling it too badly, so it didn't come up in Google search for me. So that's my own embarrassment. So I can include that in information after the live. Okay, so is there a working title of the book? Do we have a publisher? Can we look for it? What in terms of what you're working on next?
There is, but there was an announcement that there is a 2-book deal to follow. So I don't want to jump the gun by giving the title, but it will be published by Tor, and that will be February of next year. So I'm really excited about it. So I'm riffing off. It's not a complete retelling, but I'm riffing off the Helen of Troy myth. And it's so enjoyable because I think I've come up with something that might just be interesting. It's a very different thing, having worked so long in what's primarily urban fantasy, to now try to construct something of a national epic. And then I wish poetry was my form, but I'm not that sophisticated. I can only do prose. But some of the things that I've included in there are from Shona culture. Like there's this praise poetry that I'm sure you have it as well in Ghana, in which we have different clans. Most of the clans are named after a particular animal, and each one has its own kind of like epic poetry that goes with it, that retains some of its history and prestige. And playing around with those things has been so much fun. I've had to completely retool the factory, because with Ropa, I had the voice, I had the thing that I would have to do throughout the novel. It changes a little bit as she matures through the text, but there's a certain grammar and vocabulary, and I've had to do away with all that, because to construct an epic, you need to work in a different register. The world, if I used the slang and the playfulness that I did with Ropa, would maybe lose some of the gravitas that you need. So even simple things like word contractions, none of the characters will say, I'm going. They will say, I am going. The pacing of it is slower. It's more deliberate. Again, because time in this society functions very differently from our hyper age. Yeah, it's it's it,
I,
it's it was painful to start with, but I'm enjoying it so much.
yes, and I'm excited. I mean, like, I'm Julia asked which translation of Iliad. I I'm getting a
Goodness,
new.
this is Robert Eagles. So it's Penguin, and I think I think maybe Julia is asking this because I heard there was a new translation online that really, and hopefully Julia will help me out with a comment. And I forget the translator's name, but because from what I read, the translators are male, so they missed out on certain things. I read an article about that. But at this time of the day, my memory is like really, really foggy. Or was it the Odyssey? I think it was the Iliad. But this one is by, yeah, Robert
So
Eagles.
so she says that Emily Wilson. So maybe there's a new translation out by Emily Wilson, maybe of the Iliad.
Yeah, that's the one. Um, it'll be interesting. So at the end of this, and this is a duology. So what I might end up doing, and thank you for that, Julia, is picking up the Wilson translation and seeing how that affects the second part of my story. Thank you, Julia. I knew I needed you for a reason. I'll buy you a cup of coffee next time you're in Edinburgh.
Yay! So wait. So Julia is your editor, your publicist, your
No, it's a writer.
okay. So yes,
Fellow
but
idea.
I'm excited for that coffee conversation. Okay. And yeah, and I'm more excited about the Zimbabwe history as opposed to the translation of the Iliad, but I'm here for it. One last question: is
Yep.
it YA like Edinburgh Nights, or is this um,
No, this is more kind of a historical epic, but I believe that the mythical form is accessible to all ages. Young people. I fell in love with Greek mythology as a kid, reading Robert Warner's Men and Gods, which was in my primary school library. But what I'm doing, because I'm constructing it within Shona cosmology, it changes. For example, you don't have gods, you have the ancestors playing a part in events, and the ancestors are tied to their sort of like totemic clans. And this can create certain frictions. So they're every bit as interesting as your Greek gods. And even the mythical creatures that I've sort of created for this world. You have Benjuzu, which is the Shona mermaid. In some translations, water sprite. That is
mm,
really, really important in Shona belief. Mermaids live in water bodies. They will occasionally abduct people, but if you perform the right rites, your person will be returned to you and they would have been given esoteric knowledge, and there might be a healer or a diviner or an anga or something like that. But I've still wanted to give a nod to the Greek origins of what I'm doing, because this is the schema I'm working within, and and to do that, I've introduced things like the Mbizinu. Mbizi is Shona for zebra, Nu Munu person, but now you get the centaurs being half zebra, half human, because we didn't have horses.
got
So
it.
so within the historical research, again, because we were a trading empire, and this is kind of the thing that the colonialists didn't understand, that we had access to the outside world, marvels from Persia, porcelain from China, and these things were valued. Because of this, as I'm constructing it, I always have to keep an eye on what was there, what wasn't. So you get things like that. There's a bit in the story in which there's this guy called Monetti who's interested in exotic plants. And he brings to the king this new tuber. And the king is like, what's this? And he gets to taste it, and he says, this is, and I forget the Portuguese word, it's late at night. But they decide to name it Mbambaira, which is sweet potato, because the Portuguese had got it from South America and traded it there. And that's how you get these things coming into the language. So I'm doing all that work of what came in the ancient days, because I'm kind of, one of the things that my career has pivoted from, and we spoke about sort of my progression from early on. What I got a sense of when I published my first novel, The Address of Harare, was this attempt to pigeonhole me into, that usual kind of immigrant trap of, woe me, it's terrible to be an immigrant, the, culture shock kind of narrative, or the touristy culture guide explainer to audiences. And so one of the reasons that I've decided to go into the pre-colonial past is the fact that, and this isn't to diss contemporary fiction and the important work it has to do, but there is this vast, rich vein of material that we seldom mine. And I use the mining thing because I dropped out of a mining engineering course that I did for one semester after I'd finished high school. My dad wanted me to be a mining engineer. But when you've read works like Jennifer Makumbi's fantastic Kintu, which is the history of the Buganda people, and which is sort of the Bane group in Uganda, and the story is told from the lens of an ancestral curse that gets passed down from about the 18th century into the modern age. And Makumbi pretty much just dismisses colonialism, because in Zimbabwe we got colonized for 90 years, which is that when you're talking about a people with a 2,000-year history, right? It's a blink. And so I thought there's all this fantastic material that tells us more about who we are than a lot of the stuff that we publish now. And I thought, in a way, because of what Jennifer Makumbi has done, this is something that I would like to do for my own people.
I love that. I mean, like, that sounds really exciting to me. So yeah, so I can't, I'm waiting with bated breath till February of 2027. And in the chat, it says, be careful, you don't want to mess with mermaids. Agreed. Brad 601, and I know it's like literally 3 o'clock in the morning where you are. So I will end it here. But next time we'll catch up. We'll make sure to end with this or that. Tendai, thank you for giving us the Edinburgh Nights series. Thank you for giving us the fantastic character that is Ropa. And hopefully we will be in conversation again in February, March to talk about your upcoming book.
I would love that, and thank you so much for all the work Sistah Scifi does. It's very important work, and like I said, I think the talk that we did in 2021 was one of the first gigs, because that was COVID time. I think that was one of the first gigs I did for the series. So this feels like a fitting end. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll talk soon. Get some rest.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.